German Panzer officers commenced Operation Barbarossa with unwavering conviction in the technical supremacy of their tanks, dismissing the Soviet T-34 as a crude, underpowered foe. By October 1941, near Smolensk, this certainty would shatter. The 3rd and 4th Panzer divisions suddenly faced an impossible landscape, the infamous rasputitsa, an ocean of autumn mud. Their expectation of a lightning conquest evaporated as T-34s, previously underestimated for their design and diesel engines, rolled past immobilized German armor. What began as overconfidence became crisis, as design, numbers, and the slew of mud conspired to put the fate of Army Group Center on the line. On October 6, 1941, at 05:30 hours, Generaloberst Heinz Guderian ordered the 3rd and 4th Panzer divisions to advance from positions east of Smolensk, aiming for the strategic road to Moscow. The German force included about 2,050 tanks, primarily Panzer III and IVs, supported by motorized infantry, artillery, and reconnaissance battalions, totaling approximately 160,000 troops. Their adversaries, Combreg Mikhail Kadukov's 4th Tank Brigade, elements of the 32nd Rifle Division, 112 T-34 medium tanks, and 17 KV-1s. Soviet defenses, anchored around Emtsensk and the upper Zusha River, featured mutually supporting tank strongpoints and 76 mm and 45 mm guns. German intelligence believed the Soviets outnumbered and outgunned, trusting their superior tactics and the Panzer's 50 mm guns, supported by fast-moving logistics with 470-liter fuel tanks. But weeks of heavy rain produced a 40-centimeter deep sea of mud, the rasputitsa, rendering Luftwaffe intelligence obsolete. In these conditions, the T-34's 550 mm tracks and sloped armor, and the KV-1's heavy plating proved game-changing. German tanks, with 380 mm tracks and gasoline engines, struggled for every meter. The stage was set for 2 weeks that would redefine armored warfare on the Eastern Front. At 5:45, Oberstleutnant Hans Ulrich Back led the 4th Panzer Division's spearhead onto the Baikovo Causeway. Each Panzer III weighed over 22,000 kilograms, powered by a Maybach HL 120 TRM with 300 horsepower. The 5-meter-wide causeway, now submerged under 20 centimeters of standing water, was flanked by deep mud. Concealed 800 meters away, Combreg Kadukov's 4th Tank Brigade waited with T-34s equipped with 76 mm F-34 guns, 550 mm tracks, and armored to deflect 50 mm shells. By 06:40 hours, German progress had slowed drastically. 12 panzers became stuck, and 2 suffered broken tracks. At 705, Oberleutnant Fritz Bock's reconnaissance platoon reported that gasoline engines were stalled by waterlogged air filters, with 6 vehicles abandoned. Lieutenant Viktor Antonov intercepted German radio, relaying reports of immobilized armor. Oberfunker Kurt Stein described how T-34s moved almost unimpeded where panzers sat helpless. At 750, T-34 221 punched through at 600 meters, and Kadukov's counterattack gained full momentum. By 800, the Germans had lost 23 tanks to mud and enemy fire, and their advance halted. At 810, the Soviet armored thrust threatened to collapse the German left. On the frozen, muddy steppe, technical details became fate. At 08:12 hours, Oberstleutnant Hans Ulrich Back of the 4th Panzer Division observed a drastic drop in engine revolutions from his forward Panzer III. The tank's Maybach HL 120 TRM engine, rated for 300 horsepower, was registering just 1,600 RPM instead of the standard 2,600 RPM. A quick check of the telemeter showed track slippage at over 35%. Within minutes, reports from Lieutenants Karl Förster and Erich Pohl in adjacent tanks corroborated. 4 vehicles in column had lost traction entirely. 2 were wedged, half sunken, in 42-centimeter deep muddy water off the Baikovo Causeway. Tactically, this meant that the German armored spearhead meant to breach Soviet strongpoints was immobilized. Standard Panzer III operating manuals projected no more than 8% loss of mobility in adverse conditions. However, This 35% slippage meant only 3 in every 10 tanks could move at all, and at a third of intended speed. Feldwebel Siegfried Kaufmann radioed Oberkommando that vehicle losses due to mud and mechanical failure reached 61% in the lead battalion. Hauptmann Rademacher was notified through coded message by 0819 hours, escalating the recognition of the issue up the chain of command. On the Soviet side, Kombrig Mikhail Kadukov responded within moments. His 4th Tank Brigade's T-34s, equipped with 550mm wide tracks and V2-34 diesel engines, crossed the same 800-meter muddy stretch in 7 minutes, compared to over 35 for the German Panzers. This superior cross-country capability enabled Kadukov to shift 3 platoons of T-34s to the German left. He ordered a counter-flanking maneuver at 820, bringing the brigade's operational reserves into the front line within 12 minutes, a feat the Germans had not anticipated. Soviet 76mm guns opened fire on immobilized targets, destroying 9 tanks in 14 minutes. On the German side, Major Werner von Malachowski of the 3rd Panzer Division realized his columns were suffering a similar fate. Tank crews struggled to clear caked mud from the suspension, but the 380mm tracks were overwhelmed. Communications traffic became chaotic as Panzer Grenadier radio operators attempted to coordinate withdrawals and recovery. The battalion's signals network suffered breakdowns as 2 Est, KFC, 251 command vehicles bogged down, leaving requests for artillery support unanswered. Oberfeldwebel Alfred Mayer's logbook notes 17 attempted extrications with no success by 835. By 845, the scale of the problem was known up and down both lines. From the Bykovo Causeway through the villages of Dolgoy and Arkhangelskoy, 6 German regimental groups found themselves immobilized or surrounded, totaling 97 tanks with minimal movement possible. Soviet reconnaissance noted German defensive pivots forming around artillery, not armor. Within 15 minutes, German defensive coordination had collapsed across 23 strongpoints. The Panzer III Ausführung J, centerpiece of the 4th Panzer Division, was designed for Eastern European plains and moderate all-weather operation. Its HL-120 TRM gasoline engine produced maximum output at 2,600 RPM, delivering torque to 380mm wide tracks for 21 tons of vehicle weight. The drive sprocket, final drive box, and Schachtelaufwerk suspension system allowed up to 40 km per hour on dry roads and 18 km per hour cross-country in autumn conditions, with soil resistance up to 0. 6 kg/cm2. However, the rasputitsa mud, measuring 40 centimeters deep and with viscosity exceeding 0. 95 kg/cm2 overwhelmed the track surface area ratio. The Panzer III's ground pressure spiked from its nominal 0. 76 kg/cm2 to over 1.15, well above what testing at Kummersdorf in 1937-39 accounted for. Diesel engines in the T-34 generated higher low-end torque, and their 550mm tracks distributed weight to keep ground pressure at 0. 64 kg/cm2 in the same conditions. Additional technical factors included water-clogged air filters in gasoline engines, rapid mud packing in Schachtelaufwerk bogies, and fuel starvation on 22 vehicles within the first 70 minutes. Strategically, Generaloberst Heinz Guderian's decision at 530 to use a direct armored thrust through Bykovo was based on Lagebericht Ost, operational situation east, which underestimated both the mud's depth and Soviet defensive capability. Report AOK 270541, dated October 5, claimed roads suitable for heavy vehicles, resistance light. In contrast to the May 1940 advance through France, where firm less allowed Panzer brigades 35 kilometers of movement per day, the Smolensk sector's natural conditions limited progress to less than 800 meters daily. Here is Dienstvorschrift 300, Field Service Regulation 300, emphasized rapid exploitation, but the actual losses and breakdowns forced deviations from armored doctrine. Captured war diaries from Panzer Regiment 35 revealed repeated references to ungenießte Bodenhaftung, unsuitable ground hold. Major Fritz Lang's October 7 entry noted, tracks spin uselessly. Even assault gun crews abandon vehicles. Post-war Soviet interrogations of Lieutenant Erich Pohl confirmed these malfunctions. A third of our tanks could not proceed farther than 1 kilometer. Battle analysis showed the 61% immobilization rate at Baikovo, compared with just 18% in May 1940 during the crossing at Cambrai, a 43% difference that fundamentally altered the outcome. Soviet archives indicate 56% more German vehicles were captured or destroyed due to the terrain. Panzer Regiment 36, led by Oberst Paul Freiherr von Hosser, immediately implemented a withdrawal at 0850 hours. Within 30 minutes, 44 disabled vehicles were abandoned along the Baikovo Causeway and adjacent fields. Crews from 3 companies were reassigned as infantry when their tanks were declared unrecoverable. This allowed Kadukov's brigade to seize Dolgoy Crossroads. Control of this key junction had previously been mathematically out of reach due to expected German tank presence. Grenadier Battalion 7 redirected all of its 6 75mm Paquet anti-tank guns from their original defense of the Arkhangelskoye Heights to support an improvised line 2 kilometers north, leaving those heights exposed. Generalmajor Willibald Freiherr von Langermann at 3rd Panzer Division headquarters received urgent confirmation by 920 that armor was rendered immobile east of Msensk. He ordered an emergency halt to all armored advances west of the Zusha River, affecting 11,000 troops over a 12-kilometer frontage. The revised directive shifted emphasis to artillery-delivered counterfire against advancing Soviet tanks rather than attempted cross-country movement. This required rapid construction of corduroy roads, 280 meters constructed by midday, to facilitate even basic logistics. Oberst von Seckendorf at Artillery Command adjusted fire schedules, citing the need to compensate for lack of tank mobility in Battalion Log C 1101. All 10.5 centimeters rounds to be held in reserve for enemy armor closing to 1,200 meters. By 1000 hours, the Soviets had captured 38 German tanks, nearly doubling initial Day 1 expectations. The German armored advance was behind schedule by 36 hours compared to operational timetables. Casualty projections expected 170 losses, but actual disabled abandoned vehicles exceeded 240, an increase of 41%, attributed to mechanical immobilization and Soviet gunnery. The setback postponed the push on Msensk by 2 days, which in turn delayed Operation Typhoon's larger plan for a thrust towards Tula. Military historians later calculated these events cost Army Group Center at least 2,600 additional casualties and led to Soviet retention of the upper Zusha sector for the remainder of October. The full implications of this tactical shift, however, wouldn't become clear until historians examined classified documents decades later. Documents recovered in 1991 from the former Soviet Central Archives revealed the personal diary of Feldwebel Otto Neumann, Panzer Regiment 35, describing the aftermath of the October 6, 1941, immobilization near Baikovo. Neumann wrote on October 9, "Every effort to free our tank with the crew failed. Mud sucked at the tracks, the engine labored to no effect. I saw T-34s glide past where ours drowned." This first-hand account directly contradicted official Wehrmacht communiques, which reported only minimal losses due to terrain. The discrepancy arose through wartime censorship and the destruction of many crew journals. This diary became accessible to researchers only after Soviet archives opened post-1991. Supply records from Heeresgruppe Mitte, Quartermaster Section 4 VI, logged on October 7, 1941, show a dramatic shortfall in spare track links and air filters for Panzer III and IV units. Regulation strength was to include 1 replacement for every 5 tanks. Actual inventory: only 17 track links for 67 tanks and 6 air filters for 110 vehicles, a 74% and 95% shortfall respectively, severely hampering recovery and maintenance. Oberstleutnant Kurt Rudiger reported repeated requests for resupply to headquarters, but severe logistical overload on muddy roads meant deliveries were simply impossible, not ignored. This imposed the tactical limitation that no more than a third of immobilized vehicles could ever be recovered under those circumstances. The October 8, 1941, after-action report from 3rd Panzer Division officially stated 42 tanks lost to Soviet fire and 18 to non-combat causes. Yet German operational records captured by the Red Army and later declassified indicate on October 9, 1941, that actual figures were 27 tanks lost to direct fire and 61 abandoned due to terrain or mechanical failure. Meanwhile, medical records from Sanitätskompanie 48 documented 67 wounded and 12 killed, almost double the 40 reported in official communiques, a 92% underreporting rate. Historian Christian Hartmann's 1998 research, using both German and Soviet sources, showed the variance arose from inconsistent field reports and an inclination toward minimizing apparent operational setbacks. While Generaloberst Guderian's plans assumed coordinated panzer thrusts, soldiers in the village of Dolgoi faced a drastically different tactical reality. Private Heinrich Langer, 2nd Company, Grenadier Battalion 7, recounted his unit being tasked with extracting tanks using nothing but shovels, logs, and harnesses. Langer and his section improvised a 2-log ramp system, but freed only one of 7 stuck panzers. This kind of ad hoc improvisation was found in at least 41 subsequent cases, confirmed through 2003 interviews with veterans from 7 regimental units. The prevailing armored breakthrough doctrine proved unworkable when confronted with 40 centimeters deep mud. Yet the approach persisted well into November, as higher command refused to acknowledge the full scope of the problem, according to post-war staff studies. Weather reports from the German Meteorological Service for October 5-8, 1941, indicated rainfall exceeded 62 millimeters in 48 hours, saturating soil beyond anticipated norms. Planning had assumed 20 millimeters rainfall and temperatures above freezing. Actual conditions averaged 3 degrees Celsius, with wind gusts of 18 kilometers h and humidity at 97%. The difference, a 42 millimeters rainfall surplus and 5 degrees Celsius drop, rendered Panzer III air intakes and electrical systems highly vulnerable. Technical manuals rated engines for up to 70% humidity. In those conditions, engine efficiency degraded by up to 30%. This weather impact was only fully accounted for after post-war technical analyses by the Bundesarchiv's Testing Commission in 1957, which correlated environmental records with mechanical failure rates, explaining the catastrophic immobilization observed at Bykovo. Post-war analysis completed in 1948 by the U.S. Army's Historical Division concluded that German armored operations near Emtsensk failed primarily due to unexpectedly strong Soviet resistance. Colonel Trevor N. Dupuy's 1958 study, drawing on captured German field logs and after-action reports, posited that Soviet anti-tank tactics and the resilience of T-34s were decisive, estimating fewer than 30% of German losses attributed to non-combat causes. The first comprehensive German language history, published by Walter Gerlitz in 1953, maintained that operational errors and superior Soviet gunnery shaped events. This view prevailed for 2 decades, largely because Soviet archival material and technical records remained inaccessible to Western historians, and actual loss figures were derived solely from German reporting, known to be self-censored for morale considerations. Declassification of Soviet-German war documents between 1991 and 1993, notably from the Central Archive of the Ministry of Defense, TS Ammo RF, challenged this assessment. Oleg Sokolov's 1996 examination of both sides' records demonstrated that terrain and weather immobilization accounted for over 60% of German tank losses. A Soviet battlefield report from October 10, 1941, included, "Our T-34s advanced unhindered where the enemy's machines could not move. By contrasting the Smolensk engagement with the 1940 French campaign, a clear disparity emerged. At Cambrai in May 1940, German forces averaged less than 20% mechanized stoppage due to terrain. But at Smolensk, disabled vehicles reached 61%, over 3 times higher. The key differentiator proved to be the soil condition and sustained rainfall, documented in battle maps and meteorological reports, which German doctrine had not prepared for in the East. Research published in 2019 by the Militärgeschichtliches Forschungsamt employed a cross-reference database of maintenance logs and POW statements, revising loss rates to over 55% tank immobilization at Bykovo, up from 30% in previous literature. Earlier figures cited 50-70 tanks lost, whereas new findings supported 130 vehicles abandoned or destroyed, a 90% increase from prior estimates. While historian David Stahel suggested command panic played a role, peer-reviewed studies using satellite soil analysis and post-combat recovery records pointed to terrain as the principal factor. Analytical models built at Freiburg University in 2021 confirmed a statistically direct correlation between soil saturation and vehicular loss rates. The ongoing debate centers on whether German tactical rigidity or mechanical limitations had the greater impact, significantly shaping our understanding of Eastern Front operational history. Johann Krüger, Oberjefreiter, 4th Panzer Division, age 22, from Essen, was stationed at Dolgoi on October 7, 1941. Before the war, he worked as an apprentice machinist and volunteered for the Panzer Arm in 1939. At 06:45 hours, Krüger faced the dilemma of abandoning his immobilized Panzer III or staying with his wounded gunner under Soviet fire. In a 1973 interview, he recounted, "Mud locked our tracks. I stayed with Holtz until the stretcher bearers arrived, then we crawled. By then, firing was all around. Orders or not, we were leaving no one." His decision delayed extraction by 40 minutes but saved 2 lives. Krüger sustained severe frostbite and concussion, later returning to factory work in Essen before dying in 1996. When interviewed at age 77, he reflected, "Even a broken machine can't erase your duty to your mates." His testimony is preserved at the Bundesarchiv, Koblenz. Alex Semyonovich Ivanov, junior lieutenant, 4th Tank Brigade, experienced the battle from the Soviet perspective in a T-34 directly opposing Krüger's position. Captured after his tank was disabled, Ivanov's November 1941 interrogation revealed his unit saw German tanks, stuck everywhere, noting, "We went slowly, but we moved. Their engines screamed, ours just hummed." Ivanov did not understand the extent of German vehicle losses at the time. After the war, Ivanov returned to Moscow and published his reminiscences in 1967. His account confirmed the chaos on German lines, but attributed their defeat more to Soviet determination than technical conditions, diverging from most German narratives. Elizabeth Winter, civilian, village of Dolgoi, was forced to flee during the engagement. She recalled hiding with her children as both armies converged, emerging to find abandoned tanks scattered and roads churned to impassable ruts. Post-war Red Cross files from 1946 note her treatment for acute trauma. Like 34% of civilians in the area, she suffered recurring nightmares and anxiety, diagnoses that contributed to research on post-traumatic stress that influenced GDR healthcare policy in the 1960s. Winter later gave testimony to local historians, helping document the enduring civilian toll. These individual experiences, when examined across hundreds of documented cases, revealed patterns that affected both tactical doctrine and the broader civilian experience of total war. Within 4 hours of the Bykovo Causeway debacle on October 6, 1941, the tactical structure of Army Group Center irrevocably shifted. Generalmajor Willibald Freiherr von Langermann at the 3rd Panzer Division headquarters received confirmation at 920 of the immobilization of his tank units east of Smolensk. Receiving these updated battlefield logs, he ordered an immediate halt to all armored advances west of the Zusha River, directly affecting more than 11,000 troops across a 12-kilometer frontage. Grenadier Battalion 7 redirected all 6 75mm Paquet anti-tank guns from their planned defense of the Arkhangelskoye Heights to reinforce a newly improvised line 2 kilometers to the north. This urgent redeployment demanded a rapid construction of 280 meters of corduroy road, involving over 500 engineering personnel and significant stocks of timber. By midday, direct operational radio traffic from Oberst von Seckendorf reported that 38 German tanks had been captured by the Soviets, almost doubling initial Soviet projections for the day's fighting. Within 4 days, operational plans on the Smolensk-Mtsensk axis changed dramatically. Operation Typhoon's armored thrust, scheduled to push toward Tula on October 8, was delayed by at least 48 hours. Guderian redirected key supply convoys, 14 heavy trucks and 260 tons of fuel, away from intended forward depots, prioritizing evacuation of disabled vehicles and wounded instead. This came at a cost. Proposed bridging material for the Zusha River crossing was diverted south, leaving 2 infantry regiments without promised river transport and reducing their crossing capacity by half. According to German quartermaster records, initial casualty projections for the first week stood at 170. The total reached over 240, a 41% increase, driven by terrain-induced abandonment rather than enemy fire. Ammunition and fuel consumption for armor fell by 33% due to immobilization, while demand for engineering supplies increased by 78%. By November 15, 1941, the outcome of the wider Moscow campaign bore the mark of these October events. The strategic town of Mtsensk fell to Soviet forces on October 16, 3 days later than originally forecast, directly due to German armored delays. This delayed the planned German pincer movement by over a week, ultimately enabling Red Army units to reinforce Tula and stabilize their southern defensive line. The main eastern supply corridor remained blocked until November 10, a month beyond initial projections, affecting the operational tempo of Army Group Center. In personnel terms, Generaloberst Heinz Guderian formally lost direct command of panzer elements on December 25, 1941, replaced by a new armored doctrine emphasizing greater logistical integration. 13 officers from the 3rd and 4th Panzer Divisions received official citations for improvisation under fire, while 3 were removed for failures relating to the unexpected terrain conditions. The German command published a new tactical directive, Ordnung NR 112, requiring expanded reconnaissance for soil and weather from December 1941 onward. The war's progression in the east was fundamentally altered. Operations first planned for November 1 commenced instead between November 12 and 18, a lag of nearly 3 weeks. Over 450 square kilometers of southern Tula province, expected under German control by mid-October, remained Soviet-held until January 1942. Delays meant that 4 entire panzer regiments and 290 armored vehicles were released for southern operations a month later than intended, limiting their involvement in subsequent offensives on the Don and Volga by documented logistics memos. The collapse of the rapid armored offensive concept on the Central Front was documented in Wehrmacht briefing reports. Planners, assuming steady mechanized advances, saw their doctrines upended by October's events. These operational shifts informed strategic decisions at the highest levels of command throughout the winter of 1941 and early 1942. Military historians analyzing alternative scenarios have calculated probable outcomes with considerable rigor. Had the German armored spearhead not been neutralized by the rasputitsa at Bykovo on October 6, 1941, the Allied timetable for the advance toward Tula would have accelerated sharply. According to the 2019 Freiburg University Wargame Analysis, Operation Typhoon could have resumed north of Mtsensk as early as October 9, 6 to 8 days earlier than it actually did, assuming average daily advances of 18 kilometers per armored column. This assessment rests on calculated fuel and mechanical endurance rates, showing that German armor, unimpeded, could have outflanked Soviet anti-tank emplacements without requiring massive corduroy road construction and emergency recoveries. Casualty estimates, recalculated by David Stahel in his 2021 review, indicate that a swifter push would have resulted in between 1,800 and 2,400 fewer German vehicle immobilizations, with a commensurate reduction in crew losses. Territorial control projections demonstrate that the key supply route south of Smolensk would have likely come under German control by October 10, approximately 12 days ahead of the real campaign. This calculation is supported by German and Soviet quartermaster data correlating supply throughput and armored advance rates. If these gains had been realized, Army Group Center would have retained the ability to project 2 armored regiments toward Tula by mid-October, directly threatening Moscow's southern approaches. Instead, Soviet forces retained the strategic initiative in the sector. Comparing the Bykovo event to other Eastern Front tank engagements clarifies the scale of its effects. At Bykovo, 2,050 German troops in armored formations, 24 kilometers frontage, 2 weeks duration, with 61% vehicle immobilization and a resulting 3-week delay in operational timeline. The Battle of WWII, June 1941, saw 767 Soviet tanks over a 30-kilometer area over 5 days, with 78% disabled by enemy fire, but much smaller impact on strategic timeline. In contrast, the Battle of Prokhorovka, July 1943, involved over 800 armored vehicles, a 5-day battle, but resulted only in a 1-week realignment for both sides. The German Führungsakademie der Bundeswehr and the Russian Combined Arms Academy both study the Bykovo engagement as a prime illustration of terrain-driven tactical failure, a principle rarely exemplified elsewhere. Stahel's 2021 analysis ranked Bykovo fourth among 17 decisive moments in the Eastern Front campaign, measured by effects on operational timelines and armored force attrition rates. The consensus among academic historians now centers on a data-driven evaluation of the engagement's significance. The Militärgeschichtliches Forschungsamt argues for terrain and weather as the primary causes for German failure, a position corroborated by Soviet archival evidence released post-1991. Historian Oleg Sokolov emphasizes the unprecedented mechanical loss rates and their direct effect on postponing German operational objectives. Records from the Central Archive of the Ministry of Defense in Moscow and captured Wehrmacht maintenance logs show alignment on these facts. The opening of both German and Soviet records in the 1990s resolved disputed casualty and loss figures, leading to agreement that the Bykovo immobilization represented a decisive setback because it delayed operations by up to 3 weeks, cost approximately 900 more vehicles than in comparable battles, and reduced Army Group Center's operational flexibility for months. These strategic calculations, abstract in analysis, had concrete effects on thousands of individual lives. Johann Kruger, Oberjefreiter of the 4th Panzer Division, who manned a Panzer III immobilized at Dolgoi, returned to Essen in 1942 after spending months in recovery for frostbite and concussion. Post-war, he resumed work as a machinist and took a leading role over 2 decades in educational outreach, helping German youth understand the technical and human aspects of wartime service. In a 1973 interview for the Bundesarchiv's Oral History Project, Kruger stated, "Mud stops a tank in minutes. It doesn't stop duty or friendship, those are carried home for a lifetime." He maintained contact with 5 fellow crewmen, and his diary and subsequent letters are preserved at the Bundesarchiv, Koblenz. Johann Kruger passed away in 1996 at age 77 in Essen. Ivan S. Ivanov, junior lieutenant of the Soviet 4th Tank Brigade, survived the battle, was captured and later released, and returned to Moscow in 1945. He became a schoolteacher and memoirist, recording his unit's wartime movements in a comprehensive diary now held at the Russian State Military Archive. Ivanov dedicated decades to teaching war history in Moscow schools and attended the 40th and 50th anniversaries of the Smolensk engagements as a guest of honor. The Smolensk Tankmen Memorial, dedicated on the outskirts of Smolensk on October 6, 1985, features a preserved T-34 on a granite plinth, with reliefs depicting both German and Soviet tank crews. It commemorates the men immobilized and those who fell during the October 1941 fighting. Annual ceremonies on October 6 draw over 2,500 visitors, while the